The more that we would do bad things, the more people we would meet, the less substances took that same effect. So then it kind of started to escalate.
In season 1, we met with 4 incredible guests and chronicled their path to finding purpose. In season 2, we're back with 4 more incredible guests, and we're gonna walk through their lowest moments. We're gonna walk through some of their highest triumphs. And I'm Chris Dreisbach, and welcome to Repurposed.
Maggie, hi.
You ready?
Maggie Hunt, take 9. Let's go backwards with this one. If you had to pick one single greatest gift that recovery has given you, what is it and why?
I would say being able to be okay in my own skin, because I think that for a long time that was so hard. All of my kids definitely are the greatest gift, and being able to teach them how to live their lives differently. But definitely Luke, because I got pregnant when I was like a little bit over a year sober. All the odds were like up against me again, as if I was still using. And people were not really happy about that. And I think that I also doubted whether or not I was going to be able to stay sober as well. But having him in pretty much early recovery really helped me to grow up and be more responsible, and also to not just think about myself all the time. All of my children, they all have taught me different things along the way, but definitely Luke for sure.
Isn't that a super interesting thing, how something so great can happen to you, like becoming pregnant, about to have your first child, and you get negativity coming from all corners and people attacking? And I find that something that we don't talk about a whole lot in the recovery world, in the recovery space, is all the negativity that you have to deal with when you make that transition from person who uses drugs to person in recovery.
I think a lot about recovery as being super selfish and self-centered. All my family wanted me to do was get sober. And then I got sober, and I was starting to live life a little bit. And then I was a year sober, and then like 2 or 3 months later, I got pregnant. So it's not that people weren't excited about new life. People like my mom and my dad were kind of like, we have had to take care of you, and now we're going to have to take care of this baby because you're not going to be able to take care of it yourself. So
that is a fair thing.
100%,
yeah.
100%. And they weren't even being malicious at all. They were totally being realistic. And I also think that I probably believed that as well. They really were trying to show me, like, this is your responsibility. Because I did live with my mom when I first had Luke, and I was a single parent at the time. And she did not get up when the baby was crying or when I needed to do things. Obviously, she was still super supportive, but she really wanted to teach me responsibility, and I'm glad.
I feel like that's another thing that we don't talk about enough, is being a single parent in recovery. You want to talk a little bit more about that for maybe some new single moms or single dads who are entering recovery, even parents like me who had a baby at 16 years in recovery, and it's still challenging and it's still difficult. You want to talk a little bit maybe for somebody who's about to experience that or has just experienced it?
Yeah, I will say when I first got pregnant, because of the support network that I built in a 12-step fellowship, I felt really supported. I really felt like I made the right decision. You have all of these friends who are throwing baby showers for you and excited about, what's going to happen to you, etc. So I think before you have the baby, you are not realistic in what it actually is going to be. And everybody tells you, oh, you're not going to sleep, you're not going to do this. But I think that when I first got pregnant and I had all the support of people, I was not living at home. When I was getting closer to my due date, I did move home with my mom. And when I moved home with my mom, I moved to like different counties. So I had to rebuild my whole support network in AA before I had Luke. And I always used to say it's easier to be a new person in a 12-step fellowship when you're pregnant. Everybody wants to be friends with a pregnant girl, new life, etc., baby, things to talk about. I was scared too, because up until that point too, like I didn't know what, outside of like what movies show and all that kind of stuff, I had no idea what childbirth was going to be like. So, but I actually had my sponsor in the room with me when I had Luke. It was my mom and my sponsor. She brought a spiritual presence into the room. She was also in the medical field, so she was really helped to be able to bring like a singleness of purpose, because I was like, I can't do this. And she's like, well, you have to. I understand having a baby is not going to keep everybody sober. I totally recognize that. I feel really blessed that that was the case for me. Looking back at it now, like I had no idea what was going to happen. I was probably really scared too at the time. But being a new mom, and then also realizing that all of the friends and all of the people who you thought were going to be there for you every day, like they're not, because they also have their own life. And you don't even really want them to be around either. At the fellowship, like they brought meetings into me for the first couple of weeks because I couldn't go anywhere. I was also 23. Luke was born on my birthday, so he like made me another year older, which is like both good and bad, because I was also a young mom. I couldn't just go out every night. I couldn't do whatever I wanted to do. Like I said, I lived with my mom. She was not like just my live-in babysitter either. I couldn't do a lot of the things that some of my other friends would have wanted to do, but I'm also really glad for that because it really grounded me in being a parent.
I mean, honestly, as a still relatively new parent, that was a really great explanation of what it's like, all the fear and all the doubt, and it just, wow. Let's bounce back to the beginning of your life. Where did you grow up? What happened? Tell me some stories, maybe some excitement, maybe some peril, maybe some things that led you into your addiction, and let's go from there.
I was born in Philadelphia. We only lived in Philadelphia for a short period of time, and then we moved to Bucks County. My mom and my dad both come from super big Irish Catholic families. So my mom was one of 5, my dad was one of 8. They all lived in like a pretty close atmosphere of the area of Philadelphia and Bucks County, which is great. So we grew up all Philadelphia sports teams, loving all of those things, right? My mom is pretty much as straight-laced as it gets. Even still today, she'll drink half a glass of wine and be like, oh, I'm starting to feel this. I should put this down. They grew up with alcohol as being like a jovial, fun thing. They always used to talk about how like alcohol was of legal age in New Jersey at 18, so they would come from Philadelphia to New Jersey and they would drink at a young age and nobody got in trouble. And my father, however, he definitely did not grow up, and he did not, I don't want to say he didn't want to be a parent, because I think he really did want to be a parent, but he struggled with substances. And when my mom and my dad first got married, both are college educated. My mom got a job and was working like 3 jobs right after they got married. My dad was like using all of her money. They had me. He didn't grow up. He didn't get better. He continued to use substances. So then like they thought what everybody else, thinks is like, we'll fix it if we have another baby. So then they had my brother like 22 months, I think, after me. But, within that time, it was just pretty awful for my mom. She took 3 weeks maternity with my brother because there was no money and she had to go back to work. So pretty quickly after my brother was born, they separated. And then quickly after that, they got divorced. My dad and his best friend, endless drugs and alcohol were pretty much at full disposal for him, especially because his family was really wealthy. So he did not ever have any consequences, literally until he was like 60 years old. He continued to use substances. But there was a lot of love in my family, and both families really got along really well, and they loved my mom. And nobody really wanted to believe that my father was using substances because he would go to work after a little while. Like he would kind of go back and forth because he does that thing where we all do, like, if you want to use substances, you need to be able to pay for it. You can only borrow a certain amount of money. So like you do have to eventually get a job. So after my parents got divorced, he worked in between, but he lived mostly with his parents for the entire of his adult life. My mom lived with her parents while she was like going back to school, getting her life together. And then my dad lived with his parents. And I remember like growing up, not thinking I was much different in the way that our households were established because there was a lot of love. Like my aunts would always pick me up or my cousins. We were always having parties together. I remember finding out that other people didn't live with their grandparents and that like Susie down the street, like your dad lives at your house. Like that's weird. As I did get older, I remember like my dad always sleeping, always like being on the couch, always like he never really did anything with us. The extent of like, because we would go to his house like every other weekend. And I think my mom trusted us to be able to go there because he did live with his parents and he did have brothers and sisters that would like take us to do things on the weekends. But when we were with my dad, it was usually like we were going to 7-Eleven and playing like the car racing games. That was like the extent of our times. There was definitely times I remember we would have to go with him places, and it was definitely drug deals. I don't think I really realized until later, only because the people that we were maybe meeting up with were not necessarily people that I would see as being like related to us. Like, they looked very different. They smelled very different. They maybe had less teeth. You know what I mean? Like those types of things. Like I just was like, oh, this is weird. But I don't think I really kind of understood that until later. Other than that, like that's pretty much the extent of like any type of early childhood trauma. My mom never really said anything bad about my dad. I never really realized that it was as bad as it was. And so I think that for a long time, I always wanted them to get back together because like they wouldn't fight in front of us. Like sometimes when they were around us, like it would be very fun, and he was always around. Like my mom always included him in family parties or whatever. So life was like really nice. I was really supported. I always had everything that I wanted. Maybe not everything that I really want, but I had everything I needed. That's for sure. My mom, her father, was in recovery from drugs and alcohol. He went to Alcoholics Anonymous majority of his life. He died sober at like 81 years old. But yeah, growing up, like it was pretty easy. There wasn't really a lot of things that would like stamp me as like, you're going to be a drug addict later on in life.
You want to dive into maybe your first drink, your first experience with substances?
Growing up, I was really involved in dance. So I loved being on stage. I loved doing all of the fun performing arts things. For a while, I think I was really against drinking and drugs because of my dad. Because as I started to get older, I definitely started to see some of the detriments that kind of come with that, like not giving Christmas presents or the promises and the excuses. And so it was easy for me early on to say like, oh, well, this is definitely because of drugs. But I think my first drink was when I was 13, and it was at a New Year's Eve party that my mom had with all of her friends, our neighborhood friends. We lived in like a townhouse, so it was kind of like a block party in a sense. People at school were starting to like drink every now and then, and it was always like a, really risque thing. I remember my one girlfriend was like, oh, let's, have our first drink at this party because there's going to be alcohol. People won't be paying attention. It'll be fine. We'll be able to do that. I remember that night feeling like really carefree because up until that point, especially like adolescence for myself, I should say, was really difficult because I always felt like even though everything was great, like my life was great, I didn't have any major issues. I always felt like there was like some type of separation between me and everybody else. Like everybody else was always better friends with the cool kids, or everybody else, would do sports at school. And because I did do dance, like it wasn't a school related sport. So it was always things that were after school. So there, like that disconnect of people who I went to school with, people who were playing sports. I wasn't overly smart by any means. So I wasn't in any type of like accelerated classes. Like I was just pretty normal. When we drank for that first time, I remember just feeling like I can breathe a little bit more maybe than I had. All of those things that I cared about, I did not care about anymore. And I don't think that we got overly drunk that night at all, because we also didn't want to get in trouble for sneaking alcohol either. It was just like that initial sense of relief. And after that, it was really difficult for 13-year-olds, but I looked way 13. Like I looked young. So it wasn't like I had full access to alcohol. It probably wasn't until I was a little bit older that I really started getting involved with other substances as well. The typical run-of-the-mill standard progression of substances is the route that I took. I know In high school, it was a lot easier. Obviously, like everybody would have like their lunch money ultimately, like that we would save all week and like put together for like 113 bottle of vodka for like 10 people to share, you know? A lot of it was like, how are we going to be able to drink like next weekend? How are we going to be able to do this next weekend? And then it wasn't probably until I would say maybe like my sophomore year, I used my first type of manipulation tactics because my mom, she was not the cool mom. You know, she was not the mom that was going to like let everybody drink at home because we were safe. Like that was not her. She also at this point was a nurse. So like she knows and had lived through my father and had lived through her father and now her daughter. You know, she was going to do things differently. So I remember asking my dad if he would buy alcohol for us for a after party of homecoming that we were having at my house. You know, my mom obviously had no idea. The good thing about this situation with my dad was like I knew that it would be like this secret that we would keep for a long time, and I wouldn't tell anybody and he wouldn't tell anybody, and like nobody would then know. Also, other people brought alcohol too, but nobody really got super out of hand. But that's kind of like what our weekends kind of started to look like a little bit. And then it was typical, like, you know, we were drinking alcohol in fields, like just really being really irresponsible and not safe, smoking cigarettes, you know, in parking lots. And that's kind of a little bit about how the progression went. The more that we would do bad things, the more people we would meet, the less substances took that same effect. So then it was like, I always reference like that movie in Basketball Diaries when he's like, if you're going to do this, do this. If you're going to do this, you might as well do this. So then it kind of started to escalate more and more. For me and that relationship with my dad, it really started to kind of take a different turn. When I think about it from like my dad's point of view, he would see like, well, she's going to use anyway. So I would rather her use safely than like buying things on the street, which to somebody who is not someone who's like in recovery, they'd be like, well, that's crazy. Just don't use at all. You know, I would start to use that as like, well, I am going to just get it anyway. Would you rather me get it from you or would you rather me get it from someone else? And then I kind of started to also see like one of his brothers also used substances. So like it was easy for me to obtain these substances. And then it started being really cool to me to know that like I was using with my dad and that we could get certain substances from my dad if that was what we were looking for. We were going to get them anyway, but it was almost just like a little bit of an easier situation when we could get them from my dad. And then you start to use other substances that like make you stay awake and not eat. Beginning of the whole like manipulation tactic is really kind of, I think, what took hold probably around the time I was like 15, 16. And then I got arrested for the first time when I was 16. You know, you start to not be able to like hang out at your parents' house when you're hanging out with kids who are older than you because like it's just weird, you know, like is your mom going to come downstairs? You know, like if there was people who like looked a little bit shady, like I knew, like I just could not bring them into my house. We want to rent hotel rooms and have hotel parties and like have hotel parties at seedy hotels and whatever. And so I start to hang out with like people who were already on probation. And so we're at this hotel party and it was really like the beginnings of me really starting to like have those blackout moments of nights where like I don't remember. I don't remember what happened. I remember getting to the hotel. I remember being at the hotel. And then I literally just remember waking up at my dad's house the next morning, which was weird because I primarily lived at my mom's. And I would definitely not want to go to my dad's because he lived with his parents. That's like way more eyes on me. It started to like really progress at that point because I think that up until then, my mom really didn't think that anything was totally out of the ordinary. Like, oh, she's in high school, she's drinking, whatever. My mom had reached out to the police like a couple of days later to ask like what I was arrested for because I didn't know and either did she, which was like really terrible. The police said they were like, we knew she was on other substances than just alcohol because she was like a disaster. They called my dad picked me up and my mom never knew like what happened. I laughed because I remember being like, I took the fall for my boys, you know, like thinking like these are like really good relationships with people that like I would actually give my freedom up for is like so ridiculous. Put on a 6-month probation. Once a month I'd have to give a urine test and then I could be off the 6-month probation and I was under 18 so it would just go away. And I had every intention of that being the case. However, I think that I'm more powerful than the substance. And I think like, well, I'll just drink and use substances until like day 21. And then that way, like I'll clean out my system so that like when I have to meet my probation officer, like everything's going to be fine. It didn't, you know, it was a nightmare because that 6-month probation lasted 2 years. Really also what happened at that point though, my addiction started to progress even more because then instead of using substances that was going to stay in my system for 30 days, I was going to use substances that would stay in my system for 7. And then it became like, also I don't want to smell like alcohol because now my mom knows that like this is what I'm doing. I don't want to smell like alcohol because she's a nurse. She's pretty keen to that. I'm going to use things that like are more hidden to the eye here. I don't think that normal 16, 17-year-old kids are doing those things. I stopped doing all of the things that I loved. One of the things that kept me on the more straight and narrow for a long time was I did dance. And I had danced like 4 nights a week for like 4 hours a night. That was like the first thing to go because it totally got in the way of what I wanted to do with my friends. Because instead of like staying and hanging out at 7-Eleven after school and smoking cigarettes until, nighttime, I'd have to like be at a commitment. So I stopped doing dance, which was usually like a pretty big red flag for anyone who knew me because you wanted to go to school, you wanted to go to college for this. You're going to just stop doing this. And it was like my life was the only normal one. Like, yeah, what do you mean? Of course I'm going to. Like, in all reality, like this can't really be what I'm going to do forever. Started to just progress and progress. There was like underage car accidents, 2 car accidents that I got into that kept me on probation longer, additional underage drinking charges. I'm still inherently a rule follower, which I know that sounds really dumb. I don't like to get in trouble. Like I don't like to do things wrong, so to speak. So like I went to school. At Catholic school, you can bring in like canned goods for the poor and then you get out of detention. So like that's what I did. So I actually never served any detention in all of high school. I had like pretty good grades, although I remember like sometimes getting tests back and, answering questions that were like my mind was just not straight. It was not clear. There was a lot of things going on like on certain days of school. But like I went to school because also that's where the substances were. Like that's where I was going to get them. I did graduate from high school, which was like a small miracle, but I was still on that juvenile probation from when I was 16. So I still had to give like weekly urine tests and I was still just like really trying to get around the law. It caught back up to me because I had not gone to treatment at all. After high school, I think I went to treatment for the first time. But at first I was arrested and taken to a juvenile detention center. I always thought I was different or better than everybody else until you get to a place like that and they're like, strip down. You lose all sense of freedom. You have to like wash yourself in front of like other people because they have to make sure like you don't have anything on. It was and I remember up until that point, like inherently lying about any of my substance use at all. I just didn't think that I was that bad. So I like just wouldn't believe that to be true. Or I believed like this is what everybody does when they're in high school. Everybody, engages in substances. Everybody like does all these things. But also up until that point, like I wasn't really stealing anything. So I get into the juvenile detention center and like there's like Nintendo there and like it's like a phase system. So I'm like, this isn't jail. This is just like, a place where kids go who get in trouble. Until like they have you like in shackles and then you have to like go to court. And then they sent me to my first treatment center right from there into the Incorporated in Langhorne, Pennsylvania.
There was something really interesting in that part there where you kind of talked about the progression, how you went from drinking and then society kind of moved you into other substances. I've spent the last 17 years almost nonstop talking about this stuff, and I've never heard it put that way. Mm-hmm. And it really almost is like, because I have to take these drug tests for these people, I almost have to do something with less detection time. And it really never crossed my mind until that exact moment that you were talking about that. Almost how society and like the repercussions of using substances almost propel us towards those more dangerous substances. So you're in treatment at Today Incorporated.
Right.
What happens from there that leads us towards the last treatment experience or the one that brought you to recovery?
I was there for like 30 days. One of the things that my being in treatment was like, well, I really got out of hand with the drugs. So I'm definitely going to stop doing drugs because they just keep getting me in trouble. there's no way I'm going to stop drinking alcohol. I'm only 18 years old. How am I not going to have a drink at my wedding? How am I not going to live the rest of my life without drinking? Because that's what everybody does. I was smoking cigarettes at that point, and I was not allowed to smoke cigarettes while I was there. So that made me immediately think like I was different than everybody else, because I was also older than everyone else, because it was a juvenile facility. So all the kids who I was there with, because I was still on juvenile probation, they were all like 15, 16. And I was like the old wise one, like I was going to tell these kids like what to do. My biggest intention was like, okay, I have to get off probation, because it's probation's fault as to why I keep getting in trouble. So like I really got to get off probation. And then once I get off probation, like I'll do everything I need to do. While I was in treatment, it was like separated boys and girls, but like very, like the girls had to sit in the back of the room, and then there was only like 40 boys. Even in that first treatment center, I remember like trying to like take the focus off of myself, and like all of the girls would be like, oh, if you put a note in this tissue box, like whoever, like it was so like childlike, but it's like we're just trying to focus on anything else except for ourselves. I was introduced to like 12-step meetings. I really just wanted to hear whoever was like the like more hard speaker. That's like what I wanted, you know what I mean? Like I wanted to hear like whose story was the best. That's why I'm often conflicted about sending kids to inpatient treatment early on, because like I think I went in there with like an associate's degree of drug use, but like I left with like a full capacity of like understanding how to engage in other substances differently, and like routes people took, and schemes people did. But I with my goal of like, I'm getting off of probation and I'm going to get out of trouble. And then as soon as I can do those things, I can get right back to doing exactly what I want to do. So I did. I get out of treatment and I was a star pupil on probation. Like I went to outpatient, I went to 12-step meetings, but I think that I was sitting in the back. I was not staying at meetings. Plus my mom was like dropping me off. She really wanted me to like do well, but at the same time, and we didn't know this either, but like her dropping me off at meetings and then picking me up at meetings, like gave me no time of like real socialization. So I start doing things like, well, I'm just going to see how my friends are doing, because they probably want to know where I was for like the past 30 days. Obviously, like we're such good friends. Like I'm sure they were calling, and wondering where I was, and like they weren't, but that's okay. I had like a good group of girlfriends who were like, oh, well, we're still going to hang out with you, and we just won't drink or use drugs when you were there. But it was like, I knew that they were going to drink and use drugs after they were with me. So I would be like, oh, I'll just come with you guys. I promise I'm not going to drink or do drugs. I swear. Certain people who were probably like not the best influence on me also started to then come to 12-step meetings. So then it's like 13th grade at 12-step meetings, because then like all the other people who were also getting in trouble with me, then we're like all there, and we're like, this is great. We can just start hanging out now as sober people. And maybe probably believing that was actually true. The people who were also in the meetings then also had been progressing in their addiction as well. So they're using new substances, and more fun substances, and more illegal substances, and more substances that you can become physically addicted to, which at that point, all the substances I was using, the intensity, I was starting to build a tolerance, but it was not like a physical dependence where like I was totally out of control. And at that point, it became totally out of control. It was no longer like as fun, because it was like a need in order to like be normal. When I graduated from high school, I think Facebook like had first started coming out, but it was only for college students. So at the time, I remember like after I got out of treatment and I was getting off probation, I was like, what's really going to keep me sober? School, college. I do like one semester at college, and I like get a Facebook. And so like then it just starts to connect people with like what we're doing, but not really like anything super crazy. So I started hanging out with people who were like, well, we're going to spend more money in the suburbs if we buy drugs up here. But if we drive down to Philadelphia ourselves, we can get our own substances. And interestingly enough, I did not get my driver's license all through high school or up until I turned 19, because I did not want to be responsible, because like I could have everybody else drive me around and I didn't have to like be responsible behind a wheel. So I could be as high or as drunk as I wanted to, and I didn't have to like worry about that. I'm 18, so I didn't have my license, and my mom was like driving me back and forth to meetings, driving me back and forth to school. She was like really just trying to love me sober, and God bless her, because she really just wanted me to be better and different. Maybe I also did too. But it was a lot of like influence, and then it was a lot of like then dependence, both like physiological, like mental, everything. Like, I would say to her, like, I promise I'm not going to use, and like believe that. Hook me up to a lie detector test, and like I probably would have passed. And then it's like I go out with my friends, or I'm, that like phenomenon of craving takes over, and then I'm off to the races again. 18, 19, 20, 21, basically is just like me trying to do everything I can to use successfully. At that point too, you have to be like a little bit secretive with your use. Once like people start to know what you're doing, then my mom would be like, you can't use drugs and live in my house. And I was like, okay. I didn't really want to be homeless. I didn't really think it was that bad at that point. But the other thing is too, early on when I would go to meetings, like I lived at home. I didn't have any I had been arrested. I had been to like the juvenile detention center. So like I had consequences, like it's easy for me to just like justify those consequences as being like not that bad, no big deal, whatever. And then I just, find myself driving back and forth to Kensington like every day, sometimes twice a day. So then when I turned 19, I was driving one of my friends in a car, and I fell asleep at the wheel, and we crashed. And I remember, she, as a good friend, cleaned up all the substances before the police got there, so that like we didn't have any like real charges. But they did like take my blood, and I had benzos in my blood. I didn't get a DUI, but they did submit my driver's license to PennDOT. But if I could give a clean urine to PennDOT, I could get my license back. I couldn't. I just could not. I couldn't do normal things that other people were doing. Like getting to the doctor's office to like give a clean urine after being like sober for 3 days, like was just not possible for me. Okay, well, I'm going to go to detox. I did detox a couple of times. But again, it would be like, I'm on substances. I go to detox, they put me on substances, and then I leave, and then my withdrawal starts, and now I'm home. So like the only thing that I know that's going to fill that is more substances. My family was really supportive. Everybody really wanted me to get better. I just was like the monster. Meeting my loves and treatment, it's like, what's your drug of choice? Your drug of choice is this. Well, mine's this. So we won't do this. We're going to live this beautiful, sober life and ride off into the sunset until like we're both slamming drugs into our veins in Kensington, Pennsylvania.
Let's talk a little bit about when you first got sober. What happened? What drove you to it? And tell us a little bit about early recovery and what it was like for you.
After a series of 10 plus treatment centers, they decided that they wanted to send me to an aftercare program. And the aftercare program was like 90 days, living in a house, doing group at the house. It wasn't like the typical model of treatment that we see now, because it was almost 15 years ago. So it was a little bit different, maybe a little bit coming of age for that time. I was also 21 years old, so I really wasn't responsible, and like I lived at home, so like everything was pretty cushy for me still living at home, because my mom was just trying to like, do the next right thing. And I went to treatment, and I was surprised because the area that I was in, there was a lot of young people. And where I had been going to meetings, there was not a lot of young people. It was a lot of older people who had, lost cars, lost houses, lost relationships, lost things. And I didn't feel like I had hit that point. And so I went up to Scranton, Pennsylvania, and there was like younger kids than me that were sober a year or 2 years, and they made being sober really attractive and really cool. When you're hanging out with people who are all doing the wrong thing and they're all using substances, like that's what you think is cool. You're like, okay, this is what I have to do. But when you're hanging out with people who are like sober, they're going to diners, they're going bowling, they're like jumping off cliffs into water. You know what I mean? Like that is awesome. But I was pretty unemployable up until going into treatment. And so I was in this treatment center. It was originally only going to be a 90-day treatment center. I felt like I had a lot of work to do. So I ended up staying there for 4 months because they don't let you get a job until you were like 2 months there. But I had like really had a time of it. I don't know if I necessarily wanted to stay sober, but I was like, life is just not really going anywhere for me. Because also at that point, like by 21, 22, people are like graduating from college. I had done like one semester. People were starting to like do things. And now Facebook was definitely a thing at this point. I'm starting to like have that fear of missing out. Like, oh my God, like what am I doing with my life kind of thing. I am at this treatment center and I get a job and I'm going to meetings. I go live in a recovery house after this inpatient treatment center, follow a curfew and be home by 11 o'clock and like 1 a.m. on the, on the weekends. And it started to just look more and more appealing. I had been living in the recovery house, but wanted to branch out to my own. There was someone at the house who was getting an apartment. She wanted me to get an apartment with her. I was like, that's awesome. That period of time was really fun because I was sober. I was doing things with other people who were also sober, having fun, showing up for work every day, which like up until that point, like I couldn't go to work because I needed to use substances and going to work got in the way of that sometimes. It's just started to be like a breath of fresh air and just more fun. And I was ready for it. I was here for it. I don't think I was really dating anyone in early sobriety because I had some issues with like meeting people in rehab. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to try to do something different. I remember it being a bit of a spiritual nature in the sense of like, I remember praying to something that like I wasn't really 100% sure what I was praying at, but I was like, look, I know that there's a better life and a better situation for me. This is like what my prayer life consisted of. I went to Catholic school, obviously, like I knew about a power greater than myself, but I really wanted to build a relationship that they talked about, like having a relationship with a power greater than myself. I would just talk and I would just say like, okay, I know there's like going to be a better life for me. So I didn't get into a relationship, and then I celebrated a year sober, and I had built a strong foundation of like friends and support and people who like relied on me. I relied on them, got into a relationship with someone. And again, like this power struggle for me through life up until that point was like a big thing because I was like, oh, well, obviously like I can't get pregnant because I haven't yet. And so I did get pregnant and he did not stay sober, but I was like, well, I have to just move forward with life at this point. Now it's not just me that I have to think about. I was living in Scranton. My mom was like, why don't you just come live back at home with me? It jump-started me on like this new road to recovery as like a more responsible human being. I did work the 12 steps, had a spiritual experience as a result of that. Luke was born in May. I was 2 years sober that July. So it was like pretty early on. After I had Luke, like still going to meetings, still trying to live my life, got a job at a facility that I'd frequented quite a few times. And then they were like, we're going to employ you. I think at that point, I was always really embarrassed at how many times like I had relapsed or how many times I had gone into treatment, because sometimes when you're talking to old timers, and it's all mostly just like well-meaning people, when you go to treatment, like people say things like, oh, like didn't you get enough the first time? Or like, oh, did you think it was going to change? Or, what did you learn this time? And I had no good excuse for anybody. Like I just like, I had this disease of like, I just want to do more. I want to keep using, and I didn't know why I was unable to stop, I think, at that point either. I did know that I could tell people what not to do. So I got a job at a treatment center, and I really began to see the purpose of my going in and out of treatment so many times. And I do truly believe that while it also taught me a lot of lessons, I think it really taught me a lot more teaching moments for others so that like they did not have to suffer or struggle in the same way that I did. I'd be like, I already made that mistake for you. You don't have to do it. It's totally fine. And I really liked helping other people because I really felt like it gave me that same focus. I could sit around all day and be like, let's like think about all the things that it's going to be better for me or me. Like my sponsor would call me and she'd be like, what are you doing? Just sitting around thinking about yourself? And I'm like, actually, in fact, I am. Yes. So helping other people really helped me to not think about myself all the time. Because I'm a worrier, and like whether I worry for 5 minutes or 5 hours, usually life just works out the way that it's going to anyway. So if I can fill that time with helping other people, life just seemingly has more of a purpose and is better. So I got a job at a treatment center, and even though it was not the same thing, 'cause it was my job and I was working it, it didn't feel like work because I would go in and it would be fun, and all the people who I was working with were like these young, other cool people like that were sober. And then I meet Jesse, also my husband, working at this facility as well. I was totally okay and content with myself and with Luke and being single and not having to be in a relationship. And then I meet Jesse, who's also on his own independently, single and happy and not being in a relationship as well. I didn't need him to make me somebody. I was already that somebody who I believed I was. And same for him. And he was also sober longer than me, which was like attractive as well. But I was like, I have a child. Like, I don't really, I don't know how this is going to work out. He also did not know how this was going to work out. Dated each other for a while. And then like he met Luke and probably liked Luke more than me at a lot of points, even still now. I did get married after not thinking I was ever going to be able to drink at my wedding. I did not have a drink at my wedding. Other people did drink at my wedding because people don't want to come to weddings unless there's alcohol. So we did have alcohol at the wedding. We had a house that we love to take in strays. Like, we love newly sober people who have nowhere to go. We're like, you know what? We have a basement. We have a bedroom. We have places that you can go and you can stay and you can live there. Also, my dad was not sober. He never had any real reason as to why he needed to stop. He was always like saved at the end of the day. And I remember when I was in treatment, one of the times I was in treatment, it was outed that like we were using substances together. My mom was like, okay, well, there's no more contact with you and him and me and him until like I could be better. He wasn't going to change, and everybody kind of knew that, but I needed to change. So we didn't really have a relationship really until Luke was born. That's why like Luke, I think, is really like such a blessing in all of our lives, is because like he really helped me to become more responsible, but he also like allowed more family to come in, because like it's, it takes a village. So like you have a baby and then like your family really kind of comes to show up for you then. He still like walked me down the aisle. He still did all of those things. And I don't think that Jesse and him really had a really strong relationship at that point, because, Jesse was sober and he was like, we can't continue to enable your dad, which is hard for me because I did want to enable him and just allow him to just not show up places or say you're going to be somewhere and not show up. I lived out of the area at that point too. So I was like an hour and a half away. And my dad, even for a drug addict, like, promise I'm going to come to your house. Like, driving an hour and a half when like you don't have money or gas or drugs close to that spot, like, you're not going. It was probably a little bit after Jesse and I got married that, my dad had called me and asked me for money one day, and he happened to be on speakerphone and Jesse happened to be home. And if it happened a different way, I probably would have just given him the money. But Jesse was like, looking at me with care. And, I was like, you know what, Dad, like, I can't give you any money, but like I can help you get into treatment. And he said, yeah. And I was shocked because I did not think that he was ever going to go to treatment, ever, because he had been to like outpatient assessments before, and they would ask him what his drug use was, and he would tell them, and they would be like, that's impossible. And he would be like, then it's impossible. I'm going to continue to attend here, because if I'm telling you this and you don't believe that this is my use, then I'm sorry. He came out and he went to retreat, and he, at 63 years old, he went to a recovery house, which I did not think that he was going to do. He went to a recovery house, and then he, lived in our basement, and he, worked for Jesse at the recovery houses, and he was helping other guys. He was like getting tattoos and smoking Newports and wearing Air Jordans, typical like newcomer starter pack in the rooms out here, So you could just tell that he was better. And for somebody who had no life and had literally just used drugs his entire adult life, like he was a teenager, like he was behaving as if, like he would be out at diners and going to meetings and just like really just having like the best time, which makes me so happy. He celebrated a year sober in November. And like, I didn't notice anything in his behavior as being different. Jesse probably started to a little bit because he started like not having any money. But like, I was like, oh, well, he's spending it on Newports and tattoos and sneakers. You know what I mean? Like, it's totally fine. Again, enabling. Then like December 27th, I found him dead of an overdose downstairs, which was like the typical shock to find anybody like that. His presence and our presence in the rooms was so profound because like before the body even left the house, my fridge was full of food for days on end. People were there, people who like I hadn't seen in a long time, like just showed up and stayed and like would not leave. They like didn't want us to be alone, That was pretty profound because when you're using drugs, you just don't have people who are going to show up for you like that. You just don't. You're basically already dead to them, really, in general. So they've already, like, mourned your loss. At the funeral, we have a huge family, so I knew that there would be a lot of people. I turned around at the back of the church, and I just see, like, vape smoke and cigarette smoke, like, bellowing the halls of the church at the back of the, at the back of the door. But, like, that's what he would have wanted. That like last year and a half that he had sober was so profound. He was so involved. He drove Luke to school every day and he picked up Luke from school every day. It allowed me at that time to like go finish school. I was getting my bachelor's or my master's at the time, and like he allowed me to be who I was at that time without, watching my kids, doing all of that. It was quite the shock for that all to happen, but like that was the greatest amends process living in action I've ever seen in my life. So I'm not angry because I think that he was going to probably die anyway. Having that last year of fun and life that he had was, awesome. There'd be people in the rooms who'd be like, oh, are you Danny's daughter? Even like after he died, which is like just really nice, especially for him to not have really been sober for that long, but to have the impact of like Lancaster County in the way that he did was just great. Working in the fields, having family members that have been sober, his sister also lived with us for a while and she's still sober today. So like seeing the lives of other people get better is also like a massive gift.
You had to go and make me get all teary-eyed because I did. I loved your dad. Your dad was so great during that year and a half that he was here. Just kind of brought back that flood of emotion there for me too. And it makes it really hard to transition from that to anything else. But the whole kind of purpose of this docuseries is to talk about being repurposed and finding new purpose. And I think it's fairly clear from your story that your main purpose is helping other people find healing and peace. Mm-hmm. But I wanted to talk about another kind of aspect of your life, and that is your acting career, mm-hmm. which is relatively new.
Yes.
So I want to ask a quick question first. How long were you sober before you discovered your love of acting?
Probably 12 years. I always loved theater and I always loved dance and I always loved all those things. In wanting to be realistic and be consistent, and especially when I had a child that I needed to take care of, because even now, the acting career is not one that's like, you do this and you get paid this, and you do this and you get paid this, and then you just continue. It is not that. I just was like, it's just unrealistic for me. And I just would look at A-list celebrities. And I'm like, well, you know what? I don't live in Los Angeles and I don't live in New York. So it's just not going to be real for me. Because even still people will ask you, are you going to move to Los Angeles? Are you going to be in Hollywood? Or what have you done? Or what are you doing? Similar to recovery in a sense where it's literally just building blocks that are not necessarily in the straight line that it's going to be. You're just looking for the art and the opportunity and the essence of it. When I was younger, I loved to do shows and dance. Anytime we would get a chance to see a show, I loved that. My mom and I went to go see The Music Man on Broadway, and we thought Hugh Jackman was going to be in it. And so we bought really close front seats, and we were really excited. And Hugh Jackman decided he was going to move that day, and he was not at the show. So he had his understudy do it, and it was phenomenal. I remember sitting there, and I think it was because I was in New York, and New York is just a little bit more gritty, I think, sometimes in the sense of it is real people performing right on stage in front of you. And you might not know who they are or what their name is. And they're the understudy for Hugh Jackman. And you're I don't even know who you are. But it was so profound for me. And I also was you know what? Maybe I'm not too old to never do this again. The age group among that specific cast was so robust. Now, obviously, they had been doing it for longer or maybe whatever. But I looked in the playbill and there was some people who it was this is their first time on Broadway. And they were in their 50s. And so I was okay, maybe it's not too late for me. So when I got home after that, I was okay, I'm going to audition for a local theater. Now, I'm not the best of singers. It's just not my thing. However, in order to be in theater, I was okay, well, I'm going to have to sing a song. The audition was terrible, awful. I cried probably for the rest of the day and later that week. I was this is terrible. But something that just hit me that was don't give up. You've always given up. It has never been who you want to be because you're afraid of what other people are going to see or say. I enrolled in acting classes. And I realized that I'm probably not very good. Generally, I'm just very dramatic all the time. And that's okay. I'm totally okay with that. People are also okay with that, or they're not, and I don't really care as much anymore. But I am very dramatic. But it is different to different aspects in acting that I hadn't considered, memorization or things being realistic. I started taking acting classes in Philadelphia. Then I started taking acting classes virtually from New York. There's like different platforms. I started to audition for, just kind of looking. I got headshots. I, followed all the advice of different acting teachers, took different technique classes. When I got sober and I started working in the field, I took it by storm, and I was like, okay, I'm going to get all the degrees that I can because I want to learn everything that I can. And so that's kind of what I took with acting too. I was like, okay, well, I'm behind because everybody else has been doing this for a little while. So I'm going to have to like really jumpstart into doing this. And I had to like tell Jesse, who like, he knew that I had done, I danced, like, cause I danced on a Royal Caribbean cruise line when I was doing dance. Like he knew all of these things about me. Again, he also thought I was just like washed up and like that was just Maggie of yesteryear, whatever. I was like, listen, like I really do want to do this. I want you to like support me in this because it sounds very outlandish and almost crazy to be like, okay, I'm just going to pick up and just start doing this. And so he was like, okay, we're going to do this. He helps ground me. I do think that sometimes actors are very taken advantage of, especially on some of the platforms where it's like, we're going to pay you $50 to come to New York and do this thing. And Jesse's like, Maggie, in your real life, you would never do this for $50. You know what I mean? So he kind of helps me to, know my worth. Am I doing this because this is art and because this is what I want to and I want to do this? Or am I just doing this because I feel like I want to add something else to my resume? So he kind of helps support me from like a business standpoint that I'm not, I'm just seeing rose-colored glasses. I'm like, oh my gosh, I got this role. He's like, for $50, that's not anything cool. Right now, it's just really for fun. I would obviously love to like actually get, a role that I can really like embody a character and gain all movements and accents, all of the things. It's just been fun getting headshots and, networking and having new experiences, but mostly to not feel judged when I tell people that I'm doing that, because it's very like, oh, well, if you're not like Brad Pitt, what are you doing? Obviously, like there's so many talented people in the world, and I feel like a blessing to even like be in some of the things that I have been in so far, and the talented directors and teachers that I've had experiences with. But I think that the biggest thing really for me is just being like, yeah, I don't even want to say like an aspiring actress, because I feel like it still like almost like disqualifies me. Like I'm just like an artist trying to figure out like what is good and what is fun and how I can turn something into something else and make it be bright and shiny.
And there's a few pieces of that really jump out and are important to illustrate for this episode. First off, your face lights up when you talk about acting. You get a visible glow of excitement. To be able to discover something or rediscover something like that, even at 12 years in recovery, is important to talk about, because the number of people that I run into who are 6 years sober, 8 years sober, 10 years sober, 12 years sober, who lose the spark, who lose that excitement, who lose that zeal, that passion for life. I think it's important to note that you can find that purpose. You can find that thing that reignites your spark. And it's not really even on your time. It's just when the universe tosses it back to you. So I'm really glad that that's how we're ending this episode, because that is what Repurposed is about. It's about leading a life of no purpose, and then how do we find that new thing that's going to bring us out to where we need to be.
I think that you're repurposed all the time. You're just having these moments. Like a spiritual experience for me is like an action word. I'm continuously trying to find what is going to like keep me moving, what's going to be that. So yeah. You're sober than me longer.
Soberer
Soberer than me.
Yeah.